right, so we'll get started. So this is I think my 5th episode of my podcast called Reaching Extinction, and then we're also filming this for Adam Ernster's documentary 73. But I have Paul Weatherford with me today, who's been here since 2008, a Michigan native. He's a boat captain, and so he's been out here for the last, that's math, what is it, 2019, like 11 years?
Yeah, 12 years, yeah.
11, 12 years. So I just want to hear a little bit about your experience as like a whale watch captain and your experience with the Southern residents. So if you want to just tell me about like what your life is like day to day, that'd be awesome.
Oh, well, yeah, a day to day, right now compared to what it was 10 years ago, it's certainly changed a lot as far as whale watching in the San Juan Islands and the British Columbia and Gulf Islands. We used to have a lot more consistent, approach to whale watching here, and it's really changed in some really great ways and some not so great ways as long as I've been here. But when I first started here, we wouldn't see humpback whales.
Yeah.
And now we see humpback whales all the time. Which is incredible.
Yeah.
And we used to see southern resident killer whales starting in April, and see them through September or October, and now we're lucky if we see them by July.
Yeah, it's crazy, for sure.
Yeah.
So I know that you talked about like some different changes in the environment. Overall, like what have you seen? I know that you had mentioned to Adam something about the salmon, like there used to be so much that you just saw all the time and now you're not seeing it. Is that pretty accurate?
Well, no, not really. I mean, historically, even in the past 50 or 60 years, just anecdotally, I know that there was a lot more salmon here. I know from accounts of people that have lived here their whole lives or have been, had generations of family on the islands that used to be able to catch fish really consistently. Used to be able to go and catch big kings right off the north shore of the island, kind of year round. Park rangers that I used to work for would go over and cast for salmon coming out of Fossil Bay on Susha Island and catch fish easily, and even in the 1980s. And now you have to work to catch salmon. You have to, and the runs have gone down even since I've been here in the short, just over a decade that I've been fishing in the islands. It's pretty noticeable. The king salmon fishing used to be even more dependable than it is now in that short of a period of time. Pink runs have gone down. Coho runs have gone down. So, I mean, it's definitely noticeable.
Nice. I mean, not nice. That's rough. And I feel like that's pretty consistent among, like, scientific community and, like, everybody else, like, that you guys notice a difference, and that's kind of crazy. How has, like, had that impacted your job at all? Because I know, like, do you do fishing charters, or? I
did salmon fishing charters for some years, and then I stopped doing that. Left it up to guys that are more hungry for fishing than I am. I don't necessarily want to invest my time in that. It's hard work, and it's kind of like beating your head against the wall, because you get a real expectation from your clients to produce fish, and this isn't Alaska, and even if it was Alaska's not doing very well anymore either. Salmon-wise, salmon are collapsing population-wise, and over the entire West Coast, and have been for a long time. So, you're never going to really meet the expectation of
catching all of that salmon.
Catching all the salmon, so it's not something that I'm really interested in doing anymore, and sacrificing my body day in and day out to do it. So,
understandable.
Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about how, like, whale watching regulations have changed throughout your career?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's an easy one. In 2010, it was still 100 yards. 100 yards, no approach. There weren't even real regulations in Canada. Like the actual talk in the law was basically like, just don't harass the whales. Don't get in front of the whales. When I first started, people would still use the term leapfrogging, which is something that's not done anymore.
Yeah, what is that?
That's kind of what they used to do, especially in the 90s when whale watching got a lot more popular. Obviously, I wasn't here. This is all just what I've been told over the years through different avenues of, conversation. But basically, the boats would all get in a line, and one boat would basically, get up ahead of the whales, turn in front of the whales, park in front of the whales. The whales would go into the boat. They'd shut their engines off, and the whales would go, by the boat or under the boat.
Okay.
And then, that boat would drift to the back of the line, and then the next boat would go.
Wow.
And it would, this is just what I've been told. I've never actually seen that, but from what I've heard, that's kind of how it was back in the days of less regulations in the 80s and 90s. And so it was a lot of people kind of casually parking near the whales and getting those beautiful views of them. And as more boats, there were more companies, it obviously became more and more invasive into those animals' lives. So it gradually became frowned upon, and then it was the 100-yard rule was in effect when I started here, and I'm not sure when they instituted that, but I'd imagine a while before, probably before 2000.
Yeah,
I have to imagine. And so in the United States, you had to be careful. You had to be 100 yards away from the whales. Do not get in front of the whales. But there was very little law enforcement out there. Sound watch and straight watch were the only real, you wouldn't see very much. NOAA was never around. WDFW would rarely be around. They didn't have very much money in their budget for that then. And in Canada, it was well, if you're in Canada, you can basically just don't harass the whales, don't get too close to them, but it's not that big of a deal if, you don't have to worry about being within 100 yards. If the whales turn toward you, you didn't feel like we're going to get a ticket or something for being within 100 yards if you were paralleling at 100 yards, which is what we followed anyway. I mean, in Canada, we were following a 100-meter rule. And, but if the whales turned toward you, you just shut them down and let them go by, and you wouldn't feel like... it's a pretty non-invasive way to whale watch in general, but if there's a lot of boats, that
can be a little hectic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was like that until 2015, maybe. I can't remember exactly when.
Nice. And then
when they changed it, and then they, we went to 200 yards in the U.S. They instituted the kind of some of the west side rules, which was, always staying a quarter mile offshore, never getting closer than a quarter mile to the west side of San Juan Island, and then creating the half-mile buffer zone, half-mile north and south and offshore of Lime Kiln Point. And, in my opinion, that's all optics. That was all just mainly to make boats look further away from the whales around what was called Whale Watch, and still kind of is Whale Watch Park off the west side of San Juan Island. So to keep the boats further away from the whales in general, because oftentimes it would look bad if boats are, 100 or 200 yards off the whales and the whales are right on shore, because
so then there's
there's
kind
nowhere
of
for them
them
to go.
There,
There's nowhere for the animals to go, even though the whales are foraging tight to shore, because it drops off really deep right there off the west side, and the salmon are there, so they're hunting, But and I think those rules are great regardless. I've never had a problem with any of the rules. I mean, I see no reason why it shouldn't be 200 or 300 yards, regardless. But and then with the new rules in Canada, I mean, that was a big one this year. And now it's illegal to watch southern resident killer whales in Canada, where 10 years ago there wasn't really any rules.
Yeah, that's wild.
Surrounding them, other than don't be aggressive with them, don't try not to get in front of them, stuff like that.
Right.
So that those are big changes.
Yeah,
big changes for sure.
Do you know if Canada has taken any initiatives to work on the salmon crisis that they have there, or? Well,
I mean, from what I've read, I mean, anything that they're doing is they're just continuously developing more in the Fraser River, and so any sort of bringing more commercial vessel traffic into the Fraser, anything that adding any more industry into that. I mean, that's going to be the final death blow for the southern residents, because they're so dependent on that stock of fish that they won't, at least, or they won't just come in here. They just won't come in here anymore.
Yeah.
If they're going to survive without the Fraser River run, they can't come into the San Juan Islands during the summer. They need to stay out. They need to be hoping for bigger runs going to the Columbia and stay offshore.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean...
Which, that's what it sounds like, because we talked to Deborah Giles last week, and she was saying that, they seem to look healthy, and... Yeah. They seem to be, or maybe it wasn't her, somebody else, but they look healthy. It seems like they're getting, they're getting the food that they need, but it's just not here, which it's unfortunate because they've been here for so long.
Right.
That's kind of crazy. So I'm guessing, for you, if they're, obviously, if it's in Canadian waters, you're not going to go watch the residents, but do you think the additional, 100 yards to stay away from the residents in the U.S., has that made your job a little bit more challenging, or...
I personally don't think so. I think that there's a lot of people around that would probably say that it does. I tell people that it's, these days especially, that it's a privilege to be able to go watch southern resident killer whales. Given their status and, the myriad of threats that they have, threatening their very, existence right now. They could be gone so soon.
Right.
I don't think watching southern resident killer whales from 300 yards is a big deal at all. I personally, I love being far away from whales, and I don't think that people should need to be up close to whales to be able to appreciate the whales. Because if you watch a whale breach from 300 yards away, it's still incredible. Yeah. It's amazing. And southern residents tend to jump around a lot, especially when they're foraging, off the bottom end of the islands. You get a lot of playful behavior, and we got to see some of that actually this year for the first time. It was kind of refreshing because I haven't seen that in quite a long time. I had some beautiful days in the end of August and early September.
That's awesome.
Viewing them from more than 300 yards away, and spending very short periods of time with them too, but being lucky in the abundance of other humpbacks and transient killer whales and minkies around to help, give people a really well-rounded,
view of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and all the different, because there's so much more than just killer whales.
Oh yeah,
everybody puts the focus on the killer whales.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've definitely noticed that, working on different boats, everyone's like, oh, are we gonna see a killer whale today? And we don't always, but seeing the humpbacks is really awesome too. But yeah, on the no, Lord, I've got this cat smacking me, and then my dog is barking over there, so this is nice. But yeah, no, it's there's so many other animals out here, and people just don't even realize it. And then you get out here and you see them, and it's really cool to see people get inspired and whatnot. Can you tell us kind of how you got into this field, and what keeps you here?
Oh wow. Well, I grew up in a boating family, and I've always kind of been near boats, and I've been a freshwater fisherman my entire life. I came to Orcas Island because of work. My wife found a job here doing some environmental education, and I took a job working for the state of Washington, and we fell in love with the islands. It's just an incredible place, and we wanted to try to figure out a way to stay here. And the job I was working, driving boats for the state of Washington, was not going to facilitate a lifestyle that I was interested in living and staying in the islands here, because
it's expensive.
It's expensive, and so I met the owner of our company on the same dock that I was working for the state, and he told me he had a job for me driving water taxi boats when he was just starting the company off, doing water taxi and some bottom fishing. We didn't even do salmon fishing then. We just did a little bit of bottom fishing, some water taxi, and we had a one whale watching boat, and we run one trip a day with 8 or 10 people, and that was mainly Bo that was driving that boat, and so I got my captain's license, and he told me he was going to pay me good money to do it. Nice. So I did it.
Very nice.
Yeah.
That way I think it's
because I love living here. I wanted to stay here.
Yeah, no, this is a gorgeous place to live. I think that you have a unique perspective too, because a lot of people are in it for the whales because they love the whales, which you do love the whales, but at the end of the day, I think it's more relatable to people that you have to earn a living, because in the environmental field, it's so hard to get into it because, there's so many unpaid internships, and education is expensive, and 900 other reasons. So
yeah, I have 2 bachelor's degrees from the University of Oregon in environmental science and geography, and this wasn't where I was going. I was going to do research. I was interested in doing river rehab, restoration stuff, and I've always been interested in the water. I just never knew I was going to be in the salt. Yeah. I always assumed I'd be on land because rivers were really my first love.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
Oh, I studied fluvial geomorphology, and I've always been really into river fishing, trout fishing.
Nice.
Barbless, dry fly only in Oregon. I did a lot of fishing in some really beautiful places, and fishing for me has always not been about necessarily even catching. Just it was an excuse for me to put myself in really incredibly beautiful places by myself, and because I always need something to do. I'm like a busybody, and
not you.
I can't just I can't just walk on the beach. I need to look for agates. I can't just be on a boat. I want to go fishing it. I need a goal. Right. So fishing was always a way that I could put myself in really beautiful places and appreciate a place. And I always tell people that I don't even, people would always ask me back when I lived in Oregon how the fishing was. And I was like, I don't know. It was fine. But I saw some incredibly beautiful areas of this river, and it was serene. And Oregon, I'm convinced is the U.S.'s best kept secret, because I feel like so many people don't know to vacation there or to go there, and the first time I went there, my jaw was just dropped the whole time. I was like,
Is it really this gorgeous?
It's incredible.
Like, it's such a great state. Yeah, that's really awesome. But you ended up in this field because you know you need to earn a living to survive, like most people. So yeah, that's totally relatable. And I was a naturalist with the same company, just for the listeners so they know. But again, like the same reasons, because it's so hard to get into research. Like, I love research, but you have to do so many unpaid things, and that's just really unrealistic sometimes. Right. But yeah, this is like, I think that this kind of paints a perspective of how the declining population could affect, like, it's not just like an ecological thing, it's economic and it's political and social. And if the southern residents weren't here, I'm sure that would like impact your job. Obviously there's other whales, but like if there weren't killer whales here, like, I'm sure that it would look a lot different than it does now. Yeah.
I mean, there would certainly be a giant hole. I mean, that wouldn't be filled very easily. I mean, the transient, boom that's been going on the past few years is definitely a sign of the fact that there'll always be probably some killer whales swimming through the islands, throughout the year, but it will never be like it was. The way, back when you would see J's, K's, and L's every day in July, every day in August, all 3 pods together foraging off the west side, super pods for days, that'll never happen again.
Yeah. And weren't you saying that you used to be able to predict where they were going, or be like, oh, we just saw them here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's how I learned whale watching, and I think that's how many people that are still in the industry, think about it, because we have days where, even this summer, we'd have days where I'm talking with guys that have been driving boats here for 20 years, and you'd see J's and K's meet up at a certain place and then continue going. And you'd hear people say, like, oh, it's just like the good old days, which we just don't see them. But, yeah, you'd be able to predict, they come in based on the tides. We've got a big flood. You've got J's and K's coming in, a big push coming up. If they get past Callot Bluff on San Juan Island, they're going to go up to the Fraser, and they're probably going to forage up there for 2 days, and then they're going to turn around and come back. And either that, or depending on the tides, they're going to get up to Point Roberts, and then they're going to push back to the southeast to Alden Bank, and then they're going to hit Alden, North Alden marker, and turn and come back. And I mean, I've heard people call it over the radio, like, we'll see them at East Point at noon tomorrow, and sure enough, I mean, they're there. You could predict it.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that all really changed after Granny died. Like,
really? Yeah.
I mean, before Granny died, the year before that she died, they were already starting to be less present. But the year after, it's been night and day since.
Yeah.
And that first year that she was gone, they were still here, but they were not here very much. And then the second year after she was gone, they were barely here at all.
Right.
And I really, and it's all just opinion, but I really believe that she used to drag those whales in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the J's would make the K's come in, and then the L's would eventually come in, because they wanted to hang out with the J's and K's and make babies with the J's and K's. Yeah. And the L's would never come in. I mean, I've rarely seen L's go anywhere north of East Point.
Oh, wow.
Rarely L pod would ever even go past Callot Bluff. If you had all 3 pods on the west side, and J's and K's went north past Limekiln Light, then L's would get to Callot Bluff, follow them up, and flip and come back down. And J's and K's would continue up, or maybe half of the J's and half of the K's would continue up, and the other half, A group and B group of J's would split. Yeah. And then part of them would go up to the Fraser, and part of them would stay back down and frolic on the west side with the L's. And some years even, like, you wouldn't even see half of the L's. Some years half of the L's wouldn't even come in. They wouldn't even go past Discovery. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it was they were very predictable. I mean.
Yeah. That's like so different from the bigs, because I feel like the bigs are not predictable at all. You're just like, oh, where are we going to find them, and which group are we going to find today?
Certain families, like when the T65As show up in May or June, you're like, sweet, we're going to see the T6. They're going to swim laps around Orcas Island for the next 2 weeks. Yeah. And they do it. Yeah. They do it. I mean, this year I think we had almost all the T65s, if not just a few of them, around for the better part of a month. Yeah. Which was great. But the bigs certainly are, there is no real rhyme or reason to them at all.
Yeah. It's really interesting to see kind of like their migratory behavior, or, well, they're not really migrating, but their travel behavior at least. I mean, I think that just kind of shows that there's different traditions and cultures like within the family groups, and just kind of like relates that back to them not being so different from us, like at the end of the day. But that's interesting. I didn't realize that the elves like didn't really like to come up into certain areas. And
yeah, they're just more, they're loners, you know, they're more like offshore. They're more wild.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Jays spend more time in the San Juan Islands than any of the other two groups.
Mm-hmm.
K's next.
Yeah.
You know, and in my opinion, I mean, the L's and the J's just like to have sex with the K's.
There you go.
And, you know, that's kind of, and the L's come in specifically looking for those other two families in the summer for procreation reasons, because the L's are pretty self-sufficient on the outside, you know, in the western Strait of San Juan de Fuca and offshore of Vancouver Island and Washington. And I mean, L's went down to San Francisco this year, right? They got the L's in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I mean, those animals, they're
just doing what they do.
Yeah, they're doing what they do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can only imagine, like, you know, traveling that far, but for them it's probably nothing because their bodies are designed to do that, which is crazy. Do you have any particular, like, memories that stick out, like, about the Southern residents or anything of that nature?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I have some of the best whale watching memories of my career here have all been with Southern residents. I mean, it's always great to watch the bigs do their hunting and, you know, they're killing stuff.
Yes.
But, you know, especially my first couple years here when it was all still very new to me and fresh, and you'd get super pods for days where you'd get to see 2 or 3 super pods over the course of, you know, a couple weeks, and where they would, you know, you literally have like 85, 86 killer whales all together in one place. I'll never forget one time where all 3 pods were in between Saturna Island and Tumbo Island in Tumbo Channel on the inside of Boiling Reef there. 80-something killer whales. There's probably 5 or 6 whale watching boats watching them, and 15 Canadian fishing boats all driving right in the mix of them. And it's just a full-on, you know, socialization with the whales are going every which way. We were on scene with them for 45 minutes or an hour. In fact, I remember because I had my sister-in-law, my wife's sister, on the boat that day. And we're just, you know, we're all shut down mainly for the entire time that we're there, just trying to reposition, trying to stay out of the way. And I mean, I probably saw 150 or 200 breaches.
Oh my gosh.
In over an hour.
That's insane.
I got so many incredible pictures. Like so many of the great photos that I've ever taken come from a certain few days where it was so easy to get incredible shots. I mean, I saw one whale breach next to like a 12-foot little fishing boat, and so much water went into the boat, they had to like head for shore and beach it. Because the whale breached like 10 feet off their boat and splashed like 100 gallons of water in their little aluminum fishing boat. And they had to run over to the Saturna shoreline and like bail out the boat.
Gosh.
You know?
Can you imagine being in that little boat?
I've seen, I mean, yeah, I can, but I mean, yeah, it's stuff like that. That day always will stick out in my mind. And, you know, watching big groups of whales surf the container ship wakes and, you know, do the meeting ceremonies. One time I'll never forget was when I think it was J's and K's met right off of Lummi Island. And this was during the baby boom. This was in, whatever, 2012 through 2014, I think, was when all those babies were getting born, whenever that was. And J's and K's met. One was coming up Rosario and one was coming down from the Strait of Georgia, and they met right at Lummi Island. That's kind of a weird place for 2 Southern resident groups to meet. Right. And they came head on, and then they went into this wild social lineup that with Mount Baker and Lummi Island in the background, like a crystal clear, flat, calm day.
Oh my gosh!
That's that day. I don't know if you've ever seen my triple spy hop picture, where 3 whales are spy hopping and one is leaning against another one. Oh my God! I'll show it to you after this.
You'll have to send it. Maybe we can put it on the Instagram.
It's an incredible one. It's just pure love.
Oh my gosh!
And you can see the emotion in it and everything, and these animals it was like 3 females all spy hopping right next to each other and leaning on each other like on this epic August day.
So sweet.
Yeah, incredible. Like you just don't see that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
When they're all together and they're all foraging hard off the bottom end, this past 2 years, you don't see them in big groups socializing. And it's not that they aren't doing it, but
we're just not seeing it.
We're just not seeing it.
Yeah.
They're doing it further out in the strait.
For sure.
When they're here for business. They're here for food.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. There's no time for all that other stuff when you've got a mission and you come here for one reason.
Yeah, and I mean, this is all just my opinion, but...
No, I mean, it's definitely, like, valuable to hear different perspectives, too, because I think we all have a different way of thinking, and also, like, your experience is going to be different than, like, researchers or people that work for, like, the state and whatnot, so it's definitely, I think, hearing what everyone has to say definitely can help spark new ideas and new conversations about, like, conservation and, like, what are the whales doing and this and that, so it's definitely... valuable, like, just even though you weren't writing it down and doing statistics, I think it's still important information to share.
No, absolutely. I think any data that we can, anything that we can get about the whales is important for understanding, the dire situation that they're in. Yeah,
it's really interesting just to see, like, to work around an endangered species, because in school I've, like, read a lot about them, and this is, I think, the first group that I've spent a decent amount of time with. Like, I studied abroad in Tanzania, and I was, like, around species that were endangered, but, like, not quite like the southern residents here. Like, there's such a focus on them, and it seems like, these animals are so ingrained in the community and, like, the culture and just, like, way of life here. So it's, I think it's taken a little bit more seriously, and everyone loves killer whales, but at the same time, it's like, part of me kind of fears it's like we can't save the killer whales. Are we going to be able to save anything else because people love killer whales so much? Right. So that's just something I think about sometimes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say it on the boat all the time. Anytime if there's an animal that eats another animal and that animal is a prized food resource for human beings, and that animal is not going to survive. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's any hope for if lions only ate cows, there would be no lions left.
Yeah, that's true.
There would be no lions left, and the reason, I mean, it's very obvious looking at the bigs and versus the southern residents, what's going on.
Yeah, so. It's absolutely human impact, and it's,
there's no doubt about it.
It's interesting. We last episode we talked about how Granny basically has seen all these changes because, things have been pretty consistent for the whales for, like, hundreds of years, and then Granny was pretty much, like, the only one who was able to see, like, just, like, that rapid change.
Oh, yeah.
So...
Yeah, she's the original gangster. When she died, she had bullets lodged in her that were fired into her from fishermen.
That's insane.
I mean, and they never found her. They weren't able to do a necropsy on her. But from things that I read from, in the 30s and 40s, and so, I mean, people would just fire handguns at those whales. Yeah. She had bullet wound scars on her body.
Yeah. Just a true badass, honestly.
Yeah.
That's insane. It's so interesting to see the change of, like, the Lummi people started out with, like, working alongside them and, like, fishing alongside them, or at least that's my understanding of it. And then, colonizers came in and then started, making salmon. And then I guess they're shooting the whales and then capturing the whales. And now everyone loves the whales and there's so many protections. It's just interesting.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Canadians put anti-aircraft gun on a couple islands up toward the north end of Vancouver Island. Do you know about this?
No.
Oh, yeah. You should research that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Canadians, in an effort to stop the southern residents from impacting the salmon runs for fishing,
sure,
they mounted 2, like, anti-aircraft or, like automatic, like, rifles on cliff sides.
Oh, my God.
We actually saw one time up past Campbell River.
Oh, my gosh.
And we're planning on literally annihilating southern residents when they drove through with, or northern residents.
Whoa.
With these crazy, like, anti-aircraft machine guns, and they actually never used them, from what I know. I'm pretty sure
that they just, like,
but that was their plan.
Jesus.
I think it was in the 50s.
Jesus.
Because they're like, these whales are eating too many of our fish.
That's brutal.
So, I mean, but that's a pretty classic human perspective.
Absolutely. No, it definitely is. And I think we're starting to see a shift, but there's still that, idea of like, you know, oh, we have to kill anything that's not us. And I think the more evolved that we become, we see other animals are smarter and, you know, like that they deserve a place on this planet. But I honestly think it's, you know, I'd be interesting to study the brain types or brain patterns of people who like feel the need to kill animals, you know, like nonsensically versus people who want to conserve them. Just interesting, but
yeah, I mean, the funny thing is human beings are not instinctual, just like killer whales are. We operate on learned behavior. A human child can't survive in the wilderness. Either can a human killer whale. Or a human being can't survive in the wilderness, just like a baby killer whale cannot survive without its family.
Right.
And southern residents don't eat the prolific amount of marine mammals that are around them every day because they're not taught to eat them. And human beings are either taught to protect things or taught not to protect things.
That's true, yeah.
Without education, we're doomed. We are absolutely doomed, and everything else will survive us because we'll likely do such damage to our own populations that whatever animals are left, by the time we have massive population collapse, they'll be fine. Yeah. The world will go on without us.
Just let that plane go by. Yeah, no, it absolutely will. And it's just so interesting to me to see the disconnect that people have from the planet, and they don't understand that, like, we cannot survive without the resources that the planet provides, or like people that are like scared of dirt or bugs and things like that. I just get so confused. I'm like, I don't understand. Or people that don't like to get wet. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, go swimming, go outside, but
experience your life. Yeah.
Exactly. But there's so much to explore outside, and there's so many different, wild animals. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from nature, and I think it's just like that disconnect of people not knowing about nature but also not being encouraged to go outside is like a big driving factor in the reason why they don't care. Because I've noticed that people, like, I've just had different experiences where if you take somebody who maybe didn't have a certain perspective and you show them, wildlife, then all of a sudden their life is like, they have a completely new perspective and they want to, recycle or reduce their water or do like those little tiny things.
That's why our job is important. That's why I feel good about doing the job that I do. And really trying to draw on every tour, trying to teach. If I can find one it's that classic thing, if you can affect one person.
Yeah.
If you can have one positive conversation with someone, give them a reason to, want to have a more positive attitude toward conservation, even just voting. I mean, taking any little steps in their lives, having another conversation with one other person, it spreads, and that's, it's the best hope we have to, stop the imminent demise of so many species on the planet, not to mention ourselves and just general. Yeah. We're already going to see a lot of changes in our lifetimes and our children's and grandchildren's lifetimes. But if we don't start, continue to talk and continue to teach each other and continue to give people opportunities where they can experience nature and open up their eyes a little bit, then everybody's just going to continue to get turned in to get, more focused on technology and not actually
and just so disconnected
life.
from life. Absolutely. That just kind of like sparked a thought. I've throughout the course of this project, I've kind of been asking myself, like, what makes us human, or what differentiates us from other animals. And like hearing you kind of say that, it makes me think that our ability to destroy ourselves is what makes us human, because other animals face trials and tribulations and they approach it by adapting. And like with the southern residents, we see they go out, they go somewhere else and they find things. And I think our inability to adapt, like mentally, culturally, and so many other facets is what is going to cause our demise at the end of the day. But I really don't know if there's another species that can kill itself off quite the way that humans can. Like, we have like the tools to not kill ourselves and destroy our planet, but that looks like that's the route we're taking.
We're doing it very knowingly, and that's the funny thing. Like, certain animals will have instinctual checks built into them, that if populations start growing, they stop having as many babies and things like that. And then there's the natural checks in the ecosystem that, if there's, too many of this animal, then this animal population explodes and checks that animal, and then the other animal population, ends up, being overpopulated for a while, and it's those natural swings. Humans, we don't have that because we spread like bacteria. We don't grow like a normal population of animals. We grow exponentially like a bacteria or a virus.
Exactly.
And we're knowingly destroying our ability to live in this little ball of water.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, for sure. So hopefully we can, turn around and make some changes. And I know that they had like a whole orca task force or something that was dedicated to the southern residents.
But
that's
a whole other conversation.
Yeah, we need a bunch of other task force. But I mean, what's your take on the orca task force?
Just like anything that involves politicians and then, special interest groups and then, emotional members of the public. You get some good stuff that come out of them, and you get some not so good stuff coming out of them. Our politicians are very much politicians, whether they're liberal or conservative or whatever. They're in the end, they're thinking about elections, and I'm very not happy with Jay Inslee. I'm very embarrassed, actually, as a person that has been a lifelong Democrat, at how members of the Democratic Party in the state of Washington have been behaving, really kind of ignoring science. I'm very deeply rooted in science,
and as you should be,
to help form my perspectives. And I think that the phrasing and the laws, has, the changes recently have been really influenced by politics, not really taking in the true science, and then really just kind of playing toward the real emotional people that love the whales, that don't even really know why they love the whales, don't really use science to talk about why they love the whales.
They're just like, they're cute,
And they just want to kind of, that really talk a lot of trash about the whale watching industry and don't really realize the pros and cons, aren't willing to really look at, because they're taking a very emotional, perspective.
Stance on it, instead of looking at the big picture. No, I definitely agree with that. I, like, working on whale watch boats, I have heard different opinions from people. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people don't have an opinion. I remember there was an older woman who was, like, telling me how terrible the whale watching boats were, and I'm like, you're literally talking to me on a whale watch boat, you purchased this ticket, and, like, okay, like, this makes sense. But I think it's really interesting because, I ended up coming out here. I went to school in Florida, and the ecotourism that I witnessed when on dolphin research vessels was atrocious. Like, they would just drive all over the dolphins and things like that. And when I spent a semester in Tanzania, like, there were a lot of cars that would get, like, right on top of the animals in the middle of a hunt and things like that. And I remember one day we ended up just turning around and not watching. It was a lion trying to take down a zebra because we didn't want to contribute to the hundreds of cars around them. And I came up here and I wanted to see killer whales. It was just like me on a trip, and saw like how well behaved the whale watch boats were, and like that, like I just felt like it was a really good example. And I've always thought that the San Juans is like how other like areas should model themselves, because you guys absolutely respect the animals, and it's so clear that the captains, at least everyone that I've worked with, like genuinely cares about the animals and they don't want to get close to them. But I also kind of see the whale watch boats as like protection around the whales sometimes, because those big like wreck boats or the barges or other things that come through, like they know where the whales are because you guys are right next to them, or you honk at them if they're trying to drive over them.
I can't tell you how many, and this is a big shout out to all the guys that are driving the larger vessels in the San Juan Islands, versus smaller boat drivers. But those guys that are driving those bigger boats, they're all on traffic on the VHF with the vessel traffic scheme and everything, and they're calling the big ships, and they're letting them know miles and miles out. And I can't tell you how many times this year that I was out on the water and heard in the conversation, the whale watching boats taking out of their time talking with their passengers to really have a group effort to give all of the traffic that's out there as much notice as possible about where whales are and what they're doing, so that they can, have the opportunity to make slight changes in their course if they're allowed. Those huge ships are very limited in their ability to change their courses. But sometimes they have that ability, and we're doing a lot of good out there. There's certainly, issues that I think we've really been tackling really well over the past few years, about staggering our arrival times, not having, trying to limit number of boats. While we're not being forced to, we're not being forced by any government agency or law to do a lot of the things that we're doing out there, and I think that we are setting an incredible standard,
absolutely,
to follow. And anybody that wants to demonize us really just is kind of unaware about the dynamic of what's going on, and has a very uninformed perspective, and probably could use some more education about that too.
Yeah.
But I certainly don't want to give anybody a hard time that wants to. That loves the whales and wants to help protect the whales, but there's ways to do that, and there's definitely ways to not do that, and not having any whale watching boats out in the islands here would be bad for the whales, honestly.
I think so too, because that's where people form those connections, and it's like, it would devastate, people in the community to not be able to be around those animals. And I think that the San Juans has done a really good job at finding that balance between connecting without harassing. And you're absolutely right. Like, you guys set a really high standard, and no one's forcing you to do that. There's so many places that don't, like, there are laws in place and they just don't get enforced, or,
Right.
People don't want to make an effort, and it's just so incredibly different here. And it's yeah, I definitely agree with you. It's a very uninformed perspective.
We put so much time and energy into talking to each other out there, over the broad Pacific Whale Watch Association, both the United States and Canada. And if the public that demonizes whale watching really could listen to the amount of time and energy and talking that we all invest into helping everyone create the best possible wildlife experiences out there and ensure the protection, rule following, and just the minimal amount of impact to the animals that we are viewing, I think they'd be astounded. I think that they really just have no idea how much effort we put into it. The conversations start and at very early in the morning. We've got a lot of avenues to communicate, and it goes on through the night and into the next day, where we are rehashing and talking about things that happened days before, so that we can use certain things that happen out there as ways to learn, as ways to get better at what we're doing, and
right.
And I think it's been a long road. That's the path that started way before I started doing this. But I think that I don't know that we could be doing a better job than we are, especially the past couple of years. It's really impressive.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. It's definitely really inspiring, and I think that I want to get Jeff Friedman on here, who started the Pacific Whale Watch Association, and hear his take on things and his recommendations to other areas that do ecotourism, or that just want to manage animals better, or human interaction with animals.
Jeff. Did Jeff start the PWWA,
or he at least?
He's just the president.
Oh, maybe he's just the president.
He's the president on the U.S. side.
Oh, okay.
Brian Goodremont was before him, and but Jeff's been president for 4 or 5 years now, I think.
Yeah.
You'd have to talk to other company owners about that. I stay out of the politics.
Yeah, for sure. Well, do you have anything else you want to add? Because I think you definitely answered more questions than I even had. So.
Okay. Well, good. I think if there's anything that you can do to help the whales, it's get rid of some dams.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't think any amount of not eating salmon. I don't think any amount of making further and further distances is going to help southern resident killer whales. Without putting more salmon out into this area, those whales are going to be seen here less and less until they're not seen here at all. And we need to start investing millions and millions of dollars into fish hatcheries, in my opinion, and we need to be dumping fish into the Sound. otherwise, I just don't know what the future of these animals. Ken Balcom said when the number hits 70, he's going to stop counting.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
So we're at 75? 73? Yeah, we're down to 73. Mm-hmm. And Ken's been researching these animals since I was probably born. And so Ken said he's going to stop counting at 70. So the clock is ticking. What are we going to do?
Turn it around.
What are we going to do?
There's so much, like, effort and media and so many hands in this. If we can't save these animals, that's going to be like a huge failure, in my opinion, just like as people, because there's no reason why we can't. You know, we need to adapt. They've adapted. It's
Yeah, I would love it if my child, who is going to be born in the next couple of weeks, would be able to see these animals and have memory of them, which means they'd still be around in 10 years.
Yeah,
you know, and who knows? They might not be, but they could. They could. Who knows? Maybe they just need to stay on the outside. But it makes me happy to know anytime that they're not around, because hopefully that means they're finding fish somewhere.
Right.
It always, that's when people tell me that southern residents aren't around, and then they're bummed. And I say, well, you should just be hopeful that wherever they are that they're finding fish.
Yeah.
Because that is the only hope that we have for them. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Go vote.
Yeah.
All that stuff. Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.